But our friend Julio Rosas, who is a journalist at Town Hall, you've seen him on Fox, and he's been everywhere around. He's traveled for everybody this past year, and he's been at the border most recently. Just got back, and the stuff that he's seen, the coverage that he has gotten is well, it's not. There's a reason why you're not seeing it on NBC and CBS because it's telling the true story. Julio, good to see you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me again,
Of
Dana.
course. Now, I know that you've answered this question once before, but just for the sake of our listeners across the country and those who are watching the simulcast too, this you would define this as a crisis, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, to not call this a crisis is just really a denial of reality. And the reason why it's a crisis is just because of the massive numbers that we're seeing of not just single adults, but unaccompanied minors or very young children. The youngest that I saw during my time there was 7 months old, and she was being carried
Wow.
presumably by her mother, but they had gotten lost. And so the Border Patrol agent I was with, myself and the group's kind of quasi leader, who was also traveling with his family, we had to go out to try to find them because it was at nighttime and they had already had run out of water. So it was a very dangerous situation for them.
Yeah, this
But
is. Oh, go ahead.
but what I was saying, so overall, because of the numbers that we're seeing in such a short amount of time, that's why we're now seeing now the detention facilities that are on the border and a little bit beyond are completely way over their capacity. And then, of course, you have the COVID, issue that we're dealing with in both Mexico and the United States. And so it's just a complete recipe of disaster, and it's all being incentivized by the Biden administration with their open border rhetoric and their policies.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well with the policies, especially that trio of executive orders that he signed the first week that really made a lot of this, particularly the ending of the deportation, the moratorium, the pause on all more deportations right now, and then that remain in Mexico policy. You were in McAllen at one point. When I went and visited the border, we have one of our affiliates is in McAllen, one of our KURV, one of our favorites, and I've been down there at the border, and that was sort of when I was down there a few years ago. Then that was the last time I was at the border. It was in the middle of what was considered a huge wave, a deluge that was coming into the border, and I don't. Is it worse now than it was even at maybe the height of the Obama administration? Because the numbers that I'm seeing and just the stuff that you're reporting, I don't remember it being as overflowing as it was with the number of people coming in. And I mean, the lines, and it looks like there's even like stalls that are being built to process people through. What is your take on that? Have you heard from Border Patrol on that?
Yes, and so you have to kind of go back to we're going to talk about the Obama administration. His Secretary of Homeland Security, Jed Johnson, he said that 1,000 apprehensions a day he would consider a very bad day and a crisis, and we are 3 to 4 times that number right now. And you have to keep in mind we're not even in really the peak travel season because people like to cross during the springtime
Right.
before it gets really hot in the summer, and so we are you're right. The numbers are just absolutely staggering. And in a span of about 3 hours, I counted on Friday night 263 illegal immigrants crossing, and that was just in a 3 hour time span. The Border Patrol agent I was with, he's part of the union, and he told me that just in the 10-hour shift, not even the full 24 hours, but in that 10-hour shift that when we were out there, they 700 illegal immigrants turned themselves over. And that is just one portion in one sector of the entire 2,000 miles. And so you do the math on that. I'm not great at math. That's why I dropped out of college. But you do the math with that, and it's just completely unsustainable in the short term. And obviously, like I said, problematic because of the detention facilities, because we're no longer deporting unaccompanied minors. The minors right now are the ones that are suffering the most
Yeah.
in terms of just the dangerous travel up north. And then when they finally do get to the United States, then they have to deal with the poor conditions because they're just over capacity. Now, of course, one of the differences is that the outrage from, by and large, mostly the outrage that we saw 2 or 3 years ago with kids in cages and all that, that's kind of not necessarily here anymore. It is getting coverage, but obviously it's not the hyperventilating that we saw a couple years ago. And I can say personally, I did not see AOC crying outside any of the facilities that I
That
saw.
was my next question. I was gonna say, Julio. We're talking to Julio Rosas over at Town Hall. I was gonna ask him. So, did you see AOC crying? And that's, I mean, they so far. You're right. They haven't said anything about that, despite the numbers. You were at one, which is considered kind of like a trail that is used widely by illegal entrants when they're coming in after crossing the Rio and McAllen. And you said at one particular point, what was it, like in the span of like an hour or something like that, you saw about 50 people coming down that road having crossed the Rio. That's insane. That is crazy to me.
It was actually 10 minutes. We were only in that area for 10 minutes, and 49. Again, many of them kids and families had already crossed, and we had just we had just gotten to that area. So you're right. It's just the numbers that
10
we're in,
minutes.
the numbers that we're seeing right now is just completely just unheard of right now.
What did you hear from members of the community? Because whenever I've been down by the border, I have always noted that you don't see NBC's cameras down there or CBS's cameras down there talking to the people who live in these areas, unless they're, maybe like the Catholic Charities that's in McAllen. I think they're the ones that they have set up this like big, they use their facility and they set up this big area to take people in and give them, the kids particularly, give them a place to sleep, whatever. But you don't see any of these networks talking to the people who live in the towns, many of whom are Hispanic, or a lot of the ranchers on the border, many of whom are also Hispanic, who are really concerned about, especially those who have ranches, they're concerned about the crime and the danger that the cartel activity is posing to them and their families. And then people in the area are worried about what that means for their town's resources, because these aren't huge cities. I mean, they're sizable towns, but they're not massive cities. And when you're talking about the numbers, Julio, like you're talking about, I mean, that's a pretty sizable strain. And I doubt that all of these areas have budgeted to accommodate something like that. What have you heard?
So one gentleman that I had gotten to know, he has private land that the illegal immigrants cross over a lot, just because that's kind of the road that they go to turn themselves in. And then, of course, you have to keep in mind of, well, if that is how many people are turning themselves in, how many are able to evade Border Patrol because Border Patrol is too busy taking care of the people who have actually turned themselves over. But he told me he was upset because he said during the Trump years, it was basically like a wound that was constantly bleeding, and President Trump, he put a Band-Aid over it. And so he saw firsthand the traffic just dramatically decrease because there was policies and rhetoric in place that decentivized attempting to cross, because there's a lot of money that you have to pay the cartels in order to even cross. So they have to think that their investment is going to be worth it, because obviously they don't want to pay $1,200 US dollars and only to then be caught and sent back. And so now he said that he noticed an immediate difference on after January 20th, which is when President Biden reversed a lot of the policies that the Trump administration had put in place. And so he's disheartened by it, because that he grew up in that area, and that is kind of his childhood home, and now it's just a hub of illegal activity. And then just even on the nature side of things, there's just a lot of trash, because they just discard all their stuff. And ever ubiquitous in the time of COVID, there's plenty of used masks just all along the trail. And so he's really disheartened seeing that.
Yeah, it's a sad and also dangerous situation. We're talking with Julio Rosas over at Town Hall. You were mentioned the border agents as well. Under the Obama era, they had a lot of difficulty attracting border agents and then keeping them, because they do a lot of work. They're asked to do a lot of work. And I think I remember the two agents that we met down there, they had to cover a couple hundred miles, between these agents. Actually, between the two of them, it was like several hundred miles for these two agents. And I can't even imagine how, I mean, at that point, it's just, you're just providing a presence. You're not really able to actually deter or even be preventative for anything. Is that still the case at the border from your experience having just been there?
So it's a little bit different, because McAllen was in the process of getting the new border wall system, and so there's plenty of areas now, unfortunately, where there's just giant gaps, because again, one of the executive orders that President Biden implemented was to halt border wall construction, and so that pause is still in place. And so now, instead of having entire sections where instead of now only needing to have one border patrol agent make sure no one tries to climb over the fence, they now have to worry about the rest of the open areas, and then the areas where there's gaps in that border wall system, because obviously they can just go around and there's just really no point. So now, right now, in some of those areas, it's kind of useless, and the investment that was made to to build the wall has kind of gone to waste. And so a lot of people are saying, look, just fill in the gaps. Like don't make new contracts for the system. Just fill in the gaps, because that's not doing anything. In fact, it's making things worse, because it funnels people more directly into those areas, as opposed to maybe going around some of the more long ways. And it's just a lot of disorganization down there, just because there was a complete 180 on January 20th.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, because I understand the force multiplier that when border agents were talking about that, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, what, how does that really help you? But when you realize that there's, not a lot of them, and they had so much ground to cover, even if it slows some people down and allows agents to get to a place where they can catch up, or maybe even stop human trafficking, whatever it is, it does make a difference. Last question for you, Julio. So we read that there were some individuals that were not being tested. There were a couple of news stories about the bus systems, and I think it was Greyhound's CEO that had said, it had asked the administration, look, we need to make sure that we're testing people, because previously, from what I understood from what was reported, the bus drivers were not able, they were barred from asking the people getting on the buses whether or not they had been tested, and if so, were they positive. Now, we heard that those who had been remaining in Mexico as a part of the asylum process, which obviously that was one of the things that Biden did away with, at least recognition of that. They were said to have been tested if we can believe that those testing methods. But that group had been tested, but those who were entering illegally from across the border, turning themselves into Border Patrol, that group is the group, as I understand it, that wasn't being tested. What is the state of testing down there? I mean, it is a pandemic. We were told that I just played audio, the Department of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, the secretary there, saying, don't travel. So it's not safe to travel, but apparently it's okay and safe to just not test swarms of people that are entering the country and then putting them on buses to go throughout the rest of the country. What is the status of that?
So I can say testing is being done. Depending on where they cross, it changes on who. In Brownsville, the city provides testing at the bus stop. In McAllen, is that a Catholic charity that you were referring to earlier? They have also set up a testing thing. But the issue is, like, for example, in Brownsville, they don't have the authority to hold people. So they are testing them, and even if they're testing positive, they can still get on buses and go to different parts of the country. And so, and even if they did have the ability to hold them, to detain them for pandemic purposes, they wouldn't have enough space, again, just because of how many people are coming through.
Right.
So testing is being done, but in terms of being able to hold people for the 14 days of quarantining, that's not exactly happening, just because the city doesn't have the ability to hold people. That's a federal thing, and obviously catch and release is one of the things that has been reinstated under the Biden administration. Yeah.
Wow. This is only going to get worse, as you said, because spring is when that's the highest crossing period, and that's when more people are seeking to get into the United States. Oh my goodness. I hope something is done. And I do feel bad for the kids that did not volunteer to do any of this, and they're just dragged in by, be it coyotes or be it their parents or some other family member. And they, probably half of them don't even know what's going on. The little kids that are there. It's just awful. Julio Rosas, thank you, Julio, for covering this, number one, and actually going there instead of, staying ensconced in New York like some of these people writing about this, and not actually going and talking to the people and experiencing it. You do such great work, and so we're happy to have you on the show to talk to everybody. Thank you, and Godspeed in your travels.